When the Sharks start to compete, are they going to be looking to add free agents or adding pieces to other means?
You're Locked On Sharks, your daily podcast on the San Jose Sharks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome to Locked On Sharks, the premier hockey podcast covering your favorite team in the Bay Area. My name is JD Young, caretaker of the Reef, also the co-host of Western Conference Tuesdays on the Locked On NHL channel. I want to thank you for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. Proudly part of the Locked On Network. We cover your team every day, or at least 3 days a week right now during the off season. So if you want to follow along, make sure you do that by checking out podcasts wherever you get them, or you can watch on YouTube as well. And today and tomorrow as well, we're going to be looking at kind of questions around the timeline, right? And the Sharks with their rebuild, and what is a timeline for them to compete and to start kind of doing things here. So one of the questions I've kind of thought about is how does the Sharks add pieces that fit their competitive window when they start to enter that, and when should that competitive window really start to open up? So we're going to explore kind of the adding the pieces element of it today. So before we get into that, do want to let you guys know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. And as a quick reminder, I am on vacation this week. This episode I'm recording on Saturday night. So if something crazy happened, somebody got traded, somebody got signed, anything like that, I will cover it when I get back. So probably either Friday night or Saturday morning, somewhere in that timeline. But just as a reminder, I am on vacation, trying to enjoy a little bit, last little glimpse of the offseason before the craziness starts. I mean, we have, we've got rookie tournament right around the corner, all that fun stuff. So let's get into it today. And let's start by looking at kind of the Sharks and, what their cap space situation is. And Mike Grier has done a great job of clearing up cap space. And I know a lot of Sharks fans are kind of looking forward to the okay, we're going to have all this cap space. Who can we get? And just as a reminder, so going into next off season, the Sharks should have a ton of cap space. $37 million in cap space, going with a roster size of 15. You're going to have some guys you're going to need to take care of course. I know Fabian Zetterlund is kind of the big one. We did an episode about him and kind of what he could cost. Other guys who will be free agents, Mikael Granlund, we don't expect to be here by the end of the season. Luke Kunin, who knows with Kunin, Nico Sturm, those guys will all be UFAs, along with Cody Ceci and Jan Ruda. Much older guys we expect to potentially be traded at the trade deadline. And then they do have a couple RFAs. So like I said, Fabian Zetterlund, Clean Costin are the kind of the big RFAs that they'll have to kind of worry about. And then you have Bordelot and some of the younger guys as well. But for the most, those are kind of the main guys we're focused on, at least guys who will be on the roster. Also, you have Vitek Vanacek, and Mackenzie Blackwood, also UFAs. We've talked a lot about the goalie situation recently. If you want to re-sign one. If you want to go elsewhere, that's a conversation for a different day. But I know a lot of fans are like, okay, we're going to have a lot of cap space. Who should we get? And this is an episode of who's available. This is an episode of, I don't know if free agency is the way to go. If you look at some of the more successful teams in the past couple seasons, teams who have successfully rebuilt, the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Colorado Avalanche, the way they added around their core was through trades, right? the Colorado, both teams really kind of adding, especially on the blue line, around their core pieces on the front end. And yes, they had core pieces on, that they drafted and developed and had special players on the blue line. And I'm not trying to kind of mitigate what those guys did, but the way that these teams really kind of, I think, took advantage of the system. I don't want to say took advantage, but like I think kind of worked around the margins was through trades, right? Both of them built up good prospect pools, a lot of draft capital. But then as they started to get into their competitive window, took advantage of other teams' opportunities, made trades that were smart for them, and didn't make some signings as well, but signings that were kind of low cost with high rewards. So you look at the Sharks, right? Sharks have the best prospect pool in the NHL right now. You have a ton of forward prospects. You're definitely, I think the blue line's coming along as well. You have one of, if not the best goalie prospects in the NHL. Not all these guys can play for the Sharks. Like it's just, that's realistically, right? Not all of them are going to play. And you also have to think about development. Are they all going to develop on the same pace? Probably not. Some guys are going to take longer. I love Luca Cagnoni. I think he's going to be a good Sharks player. Is he going to develop at the same pace as Sam Dickinson? They're 6 months apart, or they're, like their birthdays are maybe 18 months apart, right? If I'm trying to do math on my top of my head. I still think Sam Dickinson is going to develop faster than Luca Cagnoni. Cagnoni, maybe he plays in the Barracuda this year, maybe goes back to Portland, but he's a player I think is going to take a long time to develop. Cool. Sam Dickinson, I think, is going to be in the NHL and maybe as soon as next season. He's got stuff to work on? Yes, of course he does, right? But I think the timeline and development for these players, it's going to be different, right? 5 years from now, when Cagnoni potentially kind of makes his jump and it becomes a full-time NHL player, we don't know what the Sharks team's going to look like, right? Can you wait for Cagnoni to develop? Or if you can maybe, again, I'm just picking on Cagnoni. It could be any Sharks player or any Sharks prospect. But if you can turn Cagnoni into a young player who can help you now, that is something the Sharks are going to have to look at as they continue their kind of going through their rebuild and then continuing to grow. And I know a lot of people are already saying, well, we'll just keep drafting good players. At some point, you kind of run into what the Ducks are doing right now. Or if you look at like what the Sabres are, your timelines become two different timelines on your own team. You have guys who are starting to kind of grow, like your first set of guys are starting to grow out of the timeline that your newer guys are getting drafted. And I think that's for the Sharks. Like that is something they have to keep in mind here is, yes, they're going to have a high pick in next year's draft, right? Whether it's first, third, fifth, it's going to be a high pick. Like we know this team is going to be more exciting, but they're still probably going to lose a bunch of games. This guy still is going to fit into the timeline, but you're going to, if they keep picking high again for the next 2, 3, 4 seasons, that's seasons 2, 3, 4 of Macklin Celebrini. Like everything is kind of centered around what Macklin Celebrini does. If you're Macklin Celebrini and you're 4 seasons into your career, are you going to wait for your first round pick that you just drafted to come in and be able to help you, or you're going to want to start winning now? So that is just something that this timeline is something that you have to kind of think about of, yes, you can keep drafting guys and developing guys is good, but at some point you have to kind of put your foot down and be like, this is our group. This is our core group of guys. We're going to go with these, and how do we try to build around them? And I think that's where the trades come in. So we'll talk about, where I think the Sharks will be targeting, areas of need, and then we'll talk about kind of when I think this will start to happen. So we'll get to that here in just 1 minute. If you want to go catch, a baseball game, or football season is finally upon us, you need to check out Game Time. Game Time is a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events easier. Game Time filters out the fluff to show you incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Nothing worse than, again, having to dig through a bunch of stuff. With the Game Time app, you can also curate deals to make it easier to find the best price on the great seats. They have super deals that they're running all the time. And you, of course, can see your seats before you buy them. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL, LOCKEDON NHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. So I think we all know probably where the Sharks are going to need some help. And that's going to be on the blue line, right? You have Sam Dickinson, who, very high pick, 11th overall in this year. Many thought was going to be a slam dunk top 10, potentially even a top 5 pick, like could have been as high as maybe, the second or third defenseman off the board. Dickinson, I think, is going to be a really solid player. I questions about maybe he doesn't have the offensive upside as some of the other guys in this NHL draft, but I think the floor is so high for him that worst case scenario is he's going to be a second pairing defenseman who plays a ton of minutes, right? Guy who can play in all situations, penalty kill. Like, I think that's kind of his floor. You have Shakir Mukhamadullin, who I think has a little bit more offensive upside. And you have guys like Luca Cagnoni and some, Henry Thrun, et cetera. But the Sharks, I think, still, that is going to be an area that they are going to look to add. And that's okay. All right. We have plenty of teams who have built blue lines on the fly. And one of those teams is the Colorado Avalanche, who have been a very, very good team, right? They won the Stanley Cup a couple of seasons ago, but the way they kind of built their team was, especially on the blue line, like, yes, having Cale Makar makes your life really easy because Cale Makar is a super special player. Gonna be one of this generation's best players, right? Yes, having Cale Makar makes your life easier, but the way they went about kind of adding around Cale Makar, they traded Devin Tays. They traded for Devin Tays for 2 second-round picks. They took advantage of a New York Islanders team who was cap strung, couldn't afford to pay him. And Tays on most teams would be the number 1 defenseman. But since they have Cale Makar, guess what? Tays is like a really sick second, kind of number 2 defenseman. Acquired through a trade, taking advantage of another team's issues. Darcy Kemper, goalie, they traded for in 2021. They acquired Josh Manson from the Ducks for a second-round pick. Like, it is not the hardest thing. Even this team now, like, they have gone through and they have built basically their entire defense through trading players. Like, it's okay. It is okay. Like, the way, like, it doesn't all have to be homegrown players, and that is, like, they signed a couple guys, like they signed Oliver Shillington, who's kind of a project for them this year. But a lot of these players they have acquired through trades. Like, a lot of their key core players they've acquired through trades. And then some of the guys, the peripheral guys, they just they'll sign guys to cheap contracts and then boom, kind of wash them out and then sign other guys to cheap contracts, which is what you have to do, especially when you pay guys a lot of money. Guys like Cale Makar, again, worth every penny. Nathan McKinnon, worth every penny. Like these guys that you have drafted and developed and are your core pieces. You pay those guys and then you trade for cheap talent and pay them if they kind of become one of your core pieces. But then everybody else, you just kind of shuffle through. So even the Lightning, right? The Lightning they traded a top, Jonathan Drouin, who was such a third in 2013, wasn't living up to expectations. They got Mikhail Sergachev out of it. They also traded some of their prospects who just weren't also living up to expectations. Ryan McDonough, who's, these are these like solid defensive pieces that help you win championships. Maybe not the sexiest names, in Sergachev, who they again just flipped because again they're dealing with cap issues. I think it's important to keep in mind that as the Sharks start to enter that competitive window, you don't have time to wait for guys to continue to draft, to develop, guys that you draft and develop. Once that window opens, that window can shut really soon. We as Sharks fans know that, right? 2018, 2019, man, we missed the, Western Conference Finals. We'll be back next year. This team's really good. Boom, this thing falls apart. And the wheels come off really quick. And I don't expect that to happen with, the young players that the Sharks have. But you want to be kind of whenever you're able to strike, you want to be able to strike. So I think the defense is going to be a huge part. We hope if Askarov is the guy we think he's going to be, finding a backup goalie is, yes, that's something you're going to have to do. But again, you can kind of just cycle players in and out, veteran guys in there, or cheap, cheap younger players to kind of come in, especially if Askarov turns out to be a 55 to 60 start type of player that we kind of expect him to be. Then you just need to find a guy who can play 25 games a season for you. So, and I think with the forwards, it's going to be very much like you have your core guys, right? You have your Celebrinis, you have your Eklund, you have Will Smith, hopefully Quentin Musty. That's going to be your core group of guys. How do you find pieces that also fit with them? And I think that is going to be NHL veterans who can kind of come in and fit with them. Tyler Toffoli, I think, kind of a good example of a signing where maybe you paid a little bit more, but he fits the skill set of what you're looking for. And as he kind of starts to age out, who can you find that can kind of come in and help right now? And I think for the Sharks, playing the trade game is probably going to be a better avenue than playing the free agency game, because you end up paying so much more in free agency, right? Yes, it doesn't cost you to get guys, but you end up paying for it in the contract situation, where if you're able to trade a guy, even if you trade for a guy in his last year, you can usually re-sign them for a little bit cheaper than it costs you to actually go out in free agency and sign him. For example, if Tyler Toffoli, if the Sharks had traded for him at the trade deadline last year, not to say that they would, but again, as an example, so maybe at 4 years at $6 million, what if they were able to re-sign him at 3 years at $5 million, where you kind of cut off that extra year and a little bit of extra money of the free agency tax, I guess, kind of the best way to put it. So I think that is going to be the strategy, is stay away, yes, use free agency to kind of fill in your roster, especially in the bottom part, trying to find, maybe not be those big day one spenders, but kind of filling in your roster around, and then using trades to get the big pieces, the guys who are going to make a longer term impact, especially as and guys that you're willing to pay once you trade for them. So we'll talk about when this should start, because I think that's the big question for Sharks fans is, okay, when do we start doing this? So we'll get to that here in just 1 second. All right, before we continue, of course, want to thank you guys for making Locked On Sharks your first listen. For your second listen, go check out the Locked On NHL channel, where, of course, we're still pumping out 5 episodes a week. You can check out Seth and I every Tuesday for the Locked On Western Conference, or check out any of the great shows, especially in the Bay Area, right? You got Locked On Niners, get you guys ready for NFL season, which kicks off this weekend. You also have Locked On A's, Locked On Giants, Locked On Warriors. So plenty of great stuff happening here at the Locked On Network. Cover your team every day. So when does this start? I think this very much depends on how Celebrini and Smith acclimate to the NHL. If they come out and they're good from the hop, like not just like the first week or so, but like this season, if they're good, and yes, we're not going to see the results and wins and losses this year, but if they're good, I wouldn't be surprised if Mike Weir continues to be aggressive. And we've seen him kind of ratchet up his aggressiveness, this offseason. Trading up from 14 to 11, just kind of knowing where the draft board was probably going to fall. Okay. Going to get Askarov, right? Taking advantage of another team situation where they had a guy who clearly wanted out, was supposed to be the future of their goaltending. They made their choice to pay UC Saros. Askarov becomes available, goes and gets that guy. What if this season, Celebrini's great. What if he's like a 60, 70 point player right out the gates, and Will Smith is right in the same range, right? And Eklund takes that next step that we expect him to see. B-Sid maybe makes his NHL debut. Shakir Mukhamadullin, like all these guys start to show that growth, right? Don't be surprised if you see Mike Grier kind of tap the gas a little bit more, give it a little bit more gas, and go out and try to find a young defenseman who can be part of this next group, to a guy to pair with your Sam Dickinson, or a guy to kind of help stabilize, especially with the Sharks defensive core, right? You have a lot of guys who are going to be gone here really soon. And I think for the Sharks, starting to get ahead of that. I know the blue line right now feels like a log jam. But after the Cody Cece's on last year of his deal, Jan Rude's on last year of his deal. Matt Benning it's got 2 years left. Mario Farr's got 2 years left. Jake Wallman's got 2 years left. And Vlasic has 2 years left. Like, all these guys are going to be gone in 2 years, or potentially gone. It depends what the Sharks want to do with some of them. If they want to keep Ferraro, if they want to re-sign Wallman or something like that, like they're able to do that. But then you just start kind of getting ahead of it, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Sharks do that. Maybe it's at this trade deadline, right? What if somebody becomes available? Guy, maybe like a 25-year-old defenseman. Who knows what's going to happen, right? Guy like that still fits in the Sharks timeline, because he's going to be good for the next 4 or 5 years, right? When the Sharks are going to start to get competitive. So I think if those guys show promise and show what we expect them to be, don't be surprised if it's this year, right? And on the other hand, if Celebrini and Smith, maybe it's a little slow out of the gate, right? And maybe they struggle with that transition from NCAA to NHL. It is a hard jump. It's a big jump, right? And maybe this year, maybe those guys just aren't the guys this year that we expect them to be, but you believe that they're going to be the guys, then maybe you do take your time a little bit, right? And something that, I'm going to keep going back to this, the crossover I did with Joe from Locked On Sabres, where like he mentioned it's never too early to start kind of thinking about and being aggressive with this stuff. And that's why I say it's going to be like next off season. If you need to start kind of being aggressive and putting the pieces in place and the guys who you think are going to be part of your core group of guys, and going to find those other core pieces, especially on the blue line, and then let your young guys continue to grow and develop, and having those good, stable blue liners who, again, fit the same timeline of being that like 23, 24, 25-year-old. I would be willing to go out and do it, right? And if you have to trade a good prospect, then you have to trade a good prospect. So that's going to be the game is can Mike Grier put, right? It's easy to tear things down and trade things away. Can you trade and get pieces that are going to help you and be part of your next core? And I think that's going to be the next challenge for Mike Grier is, who are you able to sign, or who are you able to trade for, who are you able to acquire that is going to be part of this next core and be part of your, these pillars for your foundation. So I am all for being aggressive this season and acquiring those guys, because again, yeah, maybe you draft top 3 and you just go best player available. Cool. It's probably going to be a forward, most likely, right? Can you sit around and wait for a second round pick to develop over the next 3 to 4 years if he's a defenseman, to be ready to kind of go with these guys? And yes, you want these guys to develop and be able to kind of come in and slide in and take over roles as guys age out. But again, right? If Macklin Celebrini is as good as we think Macklin Celebrini is going to be, you gotta be able to kind of hit the gas when it's time to go. And I would rather start to load up a little bit too early, because it's not like you can't trade it away, guys. Anyway, you don't want to go full Kings where you kind of load up all the way at once and then you're kind of stuck with your team. But again, you knowing when to start to add those pieces, I think it's going to be huge for my career. So that's going to be it for me today. We'll be back tomorrow where we're going to, again, kind of discuss more timeline stuff. We'll look at, I think, when we should expect to see some stages of contention and kind of through those different stages, and again, why everything centers around Celebrini. So make sure you guys are following wherever you get podcasts, and of course you can watch on YouTube as well. Follow the show on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Locked On Sharks. Follow me on Twitter at MyFryhole. Till tomorrow. Bye, friends.